Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Curtin on Federal News Network. Government is the application of rules to organize a community. The rules help make processes predictable and consistent, but sometimes they can get in the way of innovation. A new book suggests that getting unruly may be the key to success. Here to tell us what that means and how to do it is the author, Lauren Weiner. Lauren, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've got a book that comes out on July 1st, but give us a preview. What's your basic premise to something called Unruly?
Yeah, so I am a goody two-shoes who never, ever breaks rules. I kind of professionally grew up in the White House rulemaking office, OIRA, and so I learned how the rules work. And I've always leveraged the way the rules work to find space within the rules. And I think that, when I stepped back after kind of selling my company, after having grown it effectively, I stopped and thought, what got us here? And it was knowing the rules better than anyone else to find the space within the rules to then be able to chart my own path. And then when the rules aren't working for you or for broader society, then how to be an advocate, how to change the rules as necessary.
So there's a lot of mindset shift that I would imagine went into moving from being a rule follower to being someone who could find the space. Tell us about that. How did that work for you?
It's funny. When I was in graduate school, I had kind of, through high school, through college, I'd always done exactly what everyone expected of me, right? There was a path laid out. If you followed that path, and particularly if you not only followed that path, but went above and beyond it, you're going to find success. And then I got to graduate school and I realized I kind of don't want to follow that path anymore. And so I said, well, I don't even know what other paths there are. And everyone around me was saying, you're crazy for not following the path. This is what you've worked for. And I had, thankfully, a wonderful mentor and good friend who at the time I actually didn't know very well, but I called him in a panic and said, I don't think I want to do this, but everyone's telling me I'm crazy. What do I do? And he kind of gave me the permission to get off the treadmill, to work on something else. And I ended up, instead of going into academia, I ended up in the White House. So I certainly didn't go backward in my career, but from an academic's perspective, I really did. And it was the first time I kind of walked away from the expected path, and it certainly wasn't the last time, though.
There's a phrase that I caught at the beginning of your book where you say, being unruly gives you the opportunity to release your inner 2-year-old. And that really kind of resonated with me.
Yes.
Because I think allowing ourselves to ask why or else what is maybe one way to kind of open the door.
Yes. It's funny. There's so many things where people just automatically assume, or they tell people this is the way it's done, but they've never questioned why or looked back at the rules to see. And so just channeling that inner 2-year-old, right? I have now much older than 2 years old kids, and they still ask those questions, right? So I don't know that it's even just the 2-year-old, but it's why not? Why can't I do that? Show me where. Show me how. And when you really start questioning the rules, most of the time the rules don't say what people say they say. And so you can get into, I might be able to do things differently. It's not breaking the rules. I still don't break the rules, but it's finding the space within those rules that other people just never questioned the path that they were on.
And how do you turn down the volume on risk aversion that is required here?
So I talk about rational optimism, right? And the sky is falling, Chicken Little thinking, which I am guilty of plenty of times. I've gone down kind of a doom spiral more times than I can count. But if you can stop and kind of just do really basic cognitive behavioral therapy, real reality testing, you want to ask what's the worst thing that can happen, right? You want to know what could possibly go wrong so that you can adjust for it, so that you can plan for it. But the optimism, if you can get to an optimistic perspective, that's the part that allows you to take the risk anyway. So mitigate as much as possible, right? I document everything. I really do go through a doom spiral, hopefully without the panic. Sometimes with plenty of panic, right? And then you get to the idea of, okay, but can I take the risk anyway? And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you don't want to because you can't mitigate it to your own comfort level, and that's fine. But then what I think is really important is figuring out, is there a path forward where I can take that risk and take that calculated, mitigated risk?
I'm speaking with Lauren Weiner. She's the author of UNruly, coming out on July 1st. All right, let's take this mindset shift, this reduction of risk aversion, and put it in government speak today. Translate that for me to the government contracting space. How did you break the rules, stretch the rules in such a rule-based compliance environment?
So you don't break the rules, right? It is compliant. And so we never broke the rules. In fact, probably much less than most of the firms out there, we followed the rules. But there was always this space where people said, this is the way the rules go, right? This is how the rules work. And we went back to the source documentation every time, right? So we had an issue early on when we hired military spouses in Europe. That's how I started the company, is because I had followed my husband on military orders to Europe and couldn't find a job for myself. So we hired military spouses, and people said, you're not allowed to do that. And I said, why not? Right? The 2-year-old's question again. Why not? Why can't I? And first of all, they would say, oh, but military spouses aren't professional. That's not true. They're not smart enough. That's definitely not true. They're not educated enough. That's for sure not true. But then I would get, it's the SOFA, the Status of Forces Agreement. So fine, great. I went back to the SOFA. And luckily, I was able to find the SOFA in English, not Italian. Thank you. Right. And I was able to look at the documentation, and there's nothing in the SOFA that says no. And so we went to the next level, which was the implementing guidance, right? Or the regulations, then the implementing guidance, then the policies or the procedures, and then the forms. And the only thing that precluded us from doing it is there was nothing on the form that allowed for a military spouse as one of the people who could get the visa, the correct visa. So I went back to them and said, okay, then here's all the documentation. Here's where we're missing something. And it doesn't say we can't do it. It just is agnostic. So I've taken the liberty of doing your homework for you. And here's a brand new form that's much nicer, much easier to read, much more. And oh, by the way, it has a checkbox. So can we use this? And they were willing to do that because I had done their homework for them, and I had shown them this is the way you get through this. And this is made it easier to say yes than to say no.
That may be the secret right there, right? Making it easier to say yes than say no. So stretch that for me to the broader federal workforce, who right now is facing a lot of pressure to maybe in a perception way break rules or stretch rules, and still know that their daily job is to make sure that the government does what the government is supposed to do in compliance. How can they think more broadly when the urgency is sitting right in front of them?
I think, first of all, you take a pause, right? You first and foremost take a breath and figure out, what is the objective? What is the requirement? What are the outcomes we're looking for? And how do we do those within the rules? Because a lot of the folks around right now don't necessarily know or care about the government processes. And that's okay, I get it. But there are really clear government processes, and they're there for a reason. Some of them are not actually what we think they are. So stop, take a breath, take a step backwards, and say, okay, if we're trying to get to this outcome, how do we do that legally? How do we do that within the rules? Is that outcome the right outcome, first of all? And you know, when we're in the government, we don't always have the ability to say that's not the right outcome. We're not looking for that. But there's always a way to say, okay, what really are we trying to get at here? How can I get us there most effectively? And how can I get us there with the best policy outcomes rather than political outcomes? That's what government employees, I was one for 4 years, that's what government employees are looking for. We're not looking at the political. We're looking at the policy outcomes. So how do I get to the policy objective and the political objective, you know, that the politicals are kind of putting down on us? How do I get to that policy objective correctly and in a way that is most effective for the broader good?
Lauren Weiner, the author of UNruly, coming out on July 1st. Thank you for giving us an insight into sort of a broader perspective on this really important challenge.
Harry, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me.
We'll post this interview on federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.